In a world that moves fast and demands louder, there are men who think deeper, feel more, create from the quiet places within. This is Still Waters. Conversations for and about creative and sensitive men who refuse to skim the surface. Here we dive below the noise into the currents of meaning, purpose, and authentic masculine depth. With your hosts, Bill Allen and Marcus O'Day. Still Waters. Run deeper.
Meet Dr. Tracy Cooper, a leading voice for anyone navigating the world as a highly sensitive person, HSP. He spent years diving deep into the unique experiences of high sensation-seeking HSPs and highly sensitive men, even co-producing the documentary Sensitive Men Rising. When he isn't writing books like Thrive, Thrill, or Empowering the Sensitive Male Soul, you'll find him at Baker University's Graduate School of Education. There, he mentors doctoral candidates as they prepare for leadership roles in higher education. His insights have popped up everywhere, from the New York Times and Psychology Today to academic journals and your favorite podcasts. Deeply committed to mental health, Tracy also serves as an ambassador for the nonprofit Waltz, where he works to break the stigma around difficult conversations like suicide prevention and harm reduction, particularly for men. Currently, he's busy training the next generation of therapists and coaches through a 7-week program focused on high sensation seekers, all while putting the finishing touches on the second edition of his book, Thrill. I'm your co-host, Marcus O'Day, along with Bill Allen, and this is Still Waters Podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Still Waters Podcast. I'm Bill Allen, one of your hosts, along with Marcus O'Day, who's co-hosting with me. Today we have, and this is a treat, we have Dr. Tracy Cooper with us, and today we're going to focus on creativity, high sensation seeking, and some of the attributes of highly sensitive people. And fortunately for us, Dr. Cooper is an expert in all three of those areas. So welcome, Tracy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Bill and Marcus, for having me, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Go ahead.
You? Okay.
Sure.
Before we get started, Tracy, I think this might be helpful for our audience, is to have some foundational definitions for a couple of terms before we start asking questions and diving in. And I can't think of a better person to ask this. So if you wouldn't mind doing, just to give us a brief overview of what high sensation seeking is, and also as a trait, and also go over with us the DOES model for HSPs. They've added a few things besides the traditional 4 that we've known for many years, and I think one of those has to do with aesthetics. I thought maybe you might lay that foundation out for us. So those two terms.
Sure, absolutely. So talking about sensation seeking, this is a trait that's been around since originated in the 1960s with Dr. Marvin Zuckerman and his research into sensory deprivation experiments they were doing at that time. And they realized that some people, when they were put in isolation rooms with no noise or stimulation, tended to freak out a little bit and want out immediately. So over time, they thought, wow, this is something different. And so they realized in time that this was a different type of trait. And he refers to it as a personality trait, though he also looks at it as genetic. So it has a genetic component to it. So sensation seeking in his conceptualization, and it's been researched since that time quite extensively and applied across the board to things like addictions and criminality, as well as risky behaviors. And it has 4 main aspects to it. The first of which is thrill and adventure seeking. And this is the one that most people tend to associate with sensation seeking because it just tends to follow logically in a way. So thrill and adventure seekers tend to do things that provide an adrenaline rush, that dopamine rush in the brain, and what's called the pleasure pathway of the brain. So we get those little spurts of dopamine when we do something that's thrilling or exciting, particularly at a physical thrill. So think of people that like to drive very fast, for instance, or like to do crazy things that are more like stunts in a way, like jumping out of planes, parachuting, or bungee jumping, or, my gosh, imagine any of those things that provide a physical rush. That's thrill and adventure seeking. The second aspect of the trait is novelty and new experience seeking, and more people might identify with that when you think of that, because if you like new experiences, if you like novelty, if that kind of thing is important to you, you might be higher in sensation seeking. So you like maybe you like trying new foods, maybe you like traveling new places. Maybe that just really is a driver for you of the way that you experience life. The third aspect is it's called boredom susceptibility. So we found that not only those people wanted out of those really quiet rooms, but that they were susceptible to boredom, that they tended to not do as well in repetitive situations, uninteresting situations, and situations that were low stimulation, that were not within their optimal range of stimulation. So that's kind of boredom susceptibility. We don't do well with long-term projects necessarily. We don't do well with situations that are repetitive, uninteresting. That sounds shallow on the surface, but that is how sensation seeking works. If you're higher in sensation seeking, that boredom susceptibility really feels like a physical pain in a way. The fourth aspect of the trait of sensation seeking is disinhibition. So if you think of inhibition as like, I don't want to try anything, or I want to be very cautious about trying things, disinhibition is the opposite of that. So seeking things like social thrills, whatever form that may take, is disinhibition. So it may be attending parties, it may be doing things that are outside your normal parameters for the sake of having the experience itself. And that's what sensation seeking really is. You're willing to do those things, whatever they are, that seem exciting and new and novel and interesting, maybe even a little bit outside of your norm, because that's going to be an interesting experience for you. That's going to be a new experience. And you get a little bit of a rush from doing that. And so there's that reward that comes with it because you feel really good after you do something like that. So the encouragement is there to do more of it. It has a biological basis. When you look back at our time as hunter-gatherers, you needed those people that were willing to go out on the fringe and find new food sources, to see what was out there beyond our own tribe, and to see where the resources were, where the people, the other tribes were. So you needed those exploratory types. I've always thought of it as the Star Trek trait in a way, because it really is about going out there where nobody's at, or to see what else is going on, and then getting some kind of a thrill from that. Conversely, when you look at sensitivity, that's a trait, a genetic trait that's been identified as a genetic trait since around the mid-90s with Dr. Elaine Aron and Dr. Arthur Aron, who are both researchers. And so they delineated this trait they called sensory processing sensitivity. And the way they communicated is through the DUS model, though of course, it has been changed a little bit with the HSP R scale now, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the model was something that Dr. Elaine came up with as a way of explaining the trait in an easy to access way. And there are a few more components now. But the D stands for depth of processing. And we know that is strongly associated with people who are highly sensitive. And sensitivity is a continuum. So we know now from some studies that there are three groups of sensitive people, or sensitivity. There's the highly sensitive people that are around 30% of the overall population. There's a middle group that's a vast middle group of around 40%, and then a low sensitive group that are around another 30%. So altogether, you got 100%. But the highly sensitive people tend to be deeper processors. That doesn't necessarily imply deeper thinkers or better thinkers, just that we process everything that happens to us more deeply. That leads us to the O in the does, or overstimulation. Because we do process things more deeply, we're more exquisitely sensitive to everything in our environment, more attuned to everything in our environment, more open to everything in our environment. It can cross our boundary for feeling like, oh, wow, I've taken in too much. When you think of a finely tuned instrument like a violin, for instance, plucking the string, you can tell immediately that you're not doing it right. Yeah. It really is like playing an instrument in a way that the overstimulation is one of the negative aspects of high sensitivity when you think of it, because our world is completely overstimulating in just about every way. So people who are highly sensitive tend to have more problems with overstimulation than almost anything else. The E in the does really stands for emotional responsiveness and high empathy. So concurrent with being more open to everything in our environment, we also tend to be more empathetic towards other people. Sometimes it doesn't extend to ourselves, though. We tend to be harder on ourselves in some ways, or not have self-care routines in place. But we are more highly empathetic and understand the plights of other people, sometimes experiencing them as if they were our own. So taking on that pain of other people can have a real downside to it, but can also be a tremendous advantage if you're in a helping profession, or if you're an educator, if you're a healer in some way. Your ability to connect with people is really exceptional. The S in the DOES model really stands for sensitivity to subtle cues. So we're more attuned and aware of those subtleties in our environments, whether they're social cues, environmental cues, and sometimes we know how those things connect together. Overall, that model, that DOES model, it is more about that openness to everything in the environment. And when you think of it as a trait that evolved over time, it hasn't just been with us since the mid 1990s. It's been with us probably since the beginning of humans, modern humans as we think of them. It's something that aids in survival. It aids in reproduction. It allowed ancient humans to survive better in the wild, in the outdoors. Both of these traits evolved in the outdoors. So placing them in a modern setting is quite an interesting thing to do, because we've created a civilization that primarily focuses around sensation seeking. When you think of Western society especially, it's all extroverted all the time. There's very little inner focus, and sensitivity often gets run over. But that is the conceptualization of both high sensation seeking and high sensitivity.
Now, Tracy, let me just follow up with one thing. There are additional components that have been added recently. And there was one about aesthetic sensitivity. Is that what it's called, or something along that lines? That is something I've seen in studies before, and I think now there's, like you said, the HSPR test, HSPR test that's come out, revised test. They're, I guess, accounting for that now. But without getting into any depth and detail on it yet, is that particular aspect influential in creativity within highly sensitive people?
It's the root of creativity when you think about it. As I described, sensitivity as being an openness to our environments, which also leaves us vulnerable, of course. That's the root of creativity, is openness to your environment. You can't absorb anything if you're not open to it. If you're a closed person, you're not absorbing anything from the environment. You're not sensing anything from other people. Aesthetic sensitivity was one of those three factors that was presumed to be the basis for sensitivity for the whole model. So you had aesthetic sensitivity, biological sensitivity to context, and ease of excitation. So they're including all three of these actually still in the HSPR model. It's acknowledging that three factors. So aesthetic sensitivity is being more explicitly acknowledged in the 6 dimensions of sensitivity, as well as more recent research on vantage sensitivity, differential susceptibility, and biological sensitivity to context. Basically meaning that we're more sensitive to positive environments and more sensitive to negative environments. And we especially benefit from positive environments that are supportive and caring and nurturing in a way, but they don't have to be perfect. We just do better when we get some feedback that's positive, and when we get some support and mentoring if we need that. And we do far worse if we don't get those things. And too many HSPs don't get those things, or don't have awareness of their traits and then how to manage for those.
Yeah, got it. Thank you for that. I actually learned something today already, and that's fantastic. I love when that happens. So you've also mentioned creative impulse in terms of HSPs and HSS persons. Can you describe that and how that plays into all of this?
Yeah, absolutely, Marcus. The creative impulse that I referred to, and incidentally, I'm doing the second edition of Thrill, which is my book on high sensation seeking HSPs. That's actually going to be out this year, late in the fall. And I'm focusing entirely on creativity, because for me, creativity is a baseline. That's where I started before I did any of this other, before I even knew about sensitivity or sensation seeking. I thought of myself as a creative person. I was involved in the fine arts. I was really going to have a career as an art teacher. I know I have a vast depth and breadth in art history, very good as a fine artist, and won awards and so forth. And the interesting thing about creativity and high sensation seeking and high sensitivity is they're both fundamentally geared towards creativity, to being open to the environment, to noticing novelty in the environment, noticing subtle details. So in a way, you think of sensation seeking as the wide end of a funnel, where you have lots of ideas coming in because you're very open to the environment. Dr. Zuckerman said that high sensation seekers are highly creative individuals. It makes sense if you're out there having these very novel experiences, very novel and new experiences, not to mention intense experiences. So we love that intensity dimension. We love being at the beach watching the waves roll in and experiencing that for ourselves, that part of our brain that engages with that experiential component. But then we also have the high sensitivity part, which is a more narrow end of the funnel. So we have to have something that assesses and evaluates and processes that information and that stimulation. So you have this intake of information and ideas, and then you have this other part that's more of a deep processor, making associations between things, finding meaning in it, and then considering what to do with it. But the driver that enables you to go beyond just being a highly sensitive person and actually move it to application is what sensation seeking does, again, because of that kind of the stick that is boredom susceptibility kind of begs us to move forward. We're not good at sitting still very well. And there's some overlap with some of this and things like ADHD, but they're very different in a way as well. So the creative impulse is there. And the traits, if you're a high sensation seeker and highly sensitive, they're not separate things. They're integral within each individual. We all have many traits. So if you're a high sensation seeker and a highly sensitive, it's not that you're being one way or another at any given time. They're interacting constantly, the same way that your left brain and right brain are constantly interacting. They're not separate, unique entities. Rather, they're always communicating. They're always giving and taking a little bit. When they're out of balance, though, it becomes a real problem. So you can be less creative, for instance. That creative impulse can be stymied if you've experienced trauma in your past, because you can be more focused on safety and security. You can be more focused on routine and not like change, not like new experiences, even though you may be a high sensation seeker. So that might be quite confounding for you if you've experienced trauma. And you might say, oh, no, I'm not creative at all. But you might be surprised. I've known some people that were traumatized that were amazingly creative in their own way. So it's defining and expanding what we think of as creativity.
I wanted to ask you, Tracy, because I know you've spoken about this several times. Was it roughly 30 to 40% of highly sensitive people have high sensation seeking as also a trait that runs together? Is that about right?
We know now. Yeah, we know now from our 2023 study that we did called Sensation Seeking and its Relation to or something like that. I should know the name of the article because I'm on it. Our 2023 article, though, found that up to 50% of highly sensitive people may also be high sensation seekers. And Dr. Elaine Aron also advocated for the same thing, that up to half of highly sensitive people might be high sensation seekers. And so that matters only in terms of how that shows up in your life. So you may be one or the other, focusing more on one or the other, but they are integral at the same time. So that's part of the impetus for my work around creativity, and the shift that I'm making going forward is that we have plenty of people out there talking about the pathology of high sensitivity and talking about, here's what you need to do to become aware of it and to cope with it. I'm saying, don't worry about all that. Worry about applying it to something in your life and moving forward, because you can only ever experience each day as it comes.
Is there a gradation on high sensation seeking as well? You have some people who are really adventurous and are really looking for novelty anywhere they can find it. And you have other people who are just curious and looking for novel experiences, however small they may seem. It might affect things like romantic relationships, or it may affect everyday things, as opposed to everybody wants to go jump off a cliff in New Zealand somewhere and bungee jump. Right. So is there a gradation of that high sensation seeking? Like you said, HSPs or sensitivity is a spectrum. Is there the same thing with high sensation seeking?
There is. And Dr. Zuckerman said that it's a bell-shaped distribution with comparatively fewer people at the low end of sensation seeking, more people in the middle, and then comparatively fewer at the higher end of it. And highly sensitive people that are also high sensation seeking probably tend to be not at the extreme end of sensation seeking, probably more at a moderately high expression, which Zuckerman also said is the healthiest expression of any trait, at a moderately high expression, because then you're not entailing the cost and the penalties that are involved in being an extreme sensation seeker. I just saw yesterday or the day before, there was a man that climbed some incredibly high building, free climbing with no ropes or anything. He did it like in 90 minutes. My gosh, my first thought, that's an extreme high sensation seeker. You know, that's what you get. And those kind of individuals don't necessarily often live long enough to reproduce, though he's probably an exception to that. But yeah, taking extreme risk also entails extreme thrills. So that really pays off for them in that way. They understand the risk, but they're willing to do that to have that thrill of accomplishment and achievement, not to mention the adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is evenly distributed. You got those comparatively fewer at the high end, a bigger group in the middle, and a smaller group at the low end of sensation seeking.
I think it's a good clarification because a lot of highly sensitive people, they're more cautious, obviously, because that's the way we're wired. But they may, now that maybe some of them are just learning about this, they're thinking, well, maybe I'm not really highly sensation seeking. And I'm glad you clarified that about the middle ground and the middle area, and that's where a lot of highly sensitive people are. So that everybody who thinks or even does the test and finds out that they're over the line in terms of high sensation seeking don't have to feel pressure to do something crazy. It's the novelty that really drives this more than anything else, not so much the extreme high risk.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that I always advocate for and try to explain is that sensation seeking is more than just thrill seeking. It's more than just the crazy things like on X Games and those kinds of things, but rather it's the everyday sensation seeking. It's how you cook something different for dinner you've never tried before. You go to a different restaurant, you take a trip to somewhere you've never been, you watch a show you haven't seen before that looks interesting. For instance, I'm watching All Creatures Great and Small. So plug for that on PBS Masterpiece because they have a 2020 edition that's still running,
Oh,
and it's amazingly good. And I've seen a few of those episodes from the old series in the 70s, but wow, I'm so intrigued by this, and that's everyday sensation seeking in a way.
yeah.
So if you're a high sensation, think of yourself that way, and you like novelty, you like new experiences, you have some boredom susceptibility issues, you might even be somewhat disinhibited, and you like some kind of a little bit wild experiences that are out there pushing your own limitations a little bit. Yeah, you might be a high sensation seeker. It doesn't mean that you're an extreme high sensation seeker. Probably not as a highly sensitive person. You're probably cautious. You probably think things through, and you're concerned about things like risk. Though I should mention in our study, we actually found an incongruous study or an incongruous finding that we had to puzzle on a little bit around neuroticism, what we call negative urgency. But we understood that when people are overstimulated, they may feel like a need to do something impulsive to get out of the situation, or they may react badly by that need because they're overstimulated and they're freaking out a little bit. So that's what we attributed it to at the same time. But if you're a high sensation seeking HSP, yeah, it's a matter of understanding it as an integral manifestation, an integral expression within your own body, within your own self. And the way that you can experience the world, you have all these options now that are open to you in a way that you're so open to your environment, you can process things so deeply and they're meaningful for you. So we seek out those meaningful connecting experiences.
You found that people who express themselves creatively as sensitive people, you feel that that's a way to control their environment and how they interpret their environment? Is that something that makes sense?
That's a great question, Marcus. And I've thought about this often. It's something I'm writing about in the second edition of Thrill is that creativity is something that's with us lifelong.
Mhm.
It's something that's inherent in all people. Most people will say, unfortunately, I can't draw a stick figure or I'm not creative. Those are cultural messages that they have subscribed to because they feel like they're not good at it or they haven't really worked at it long enough or they've put it aside in favor of doing whatever they think is expected of them. But all people are creative. It's a matter of thinking of it in a different way. And one of the things that you can identify with creativity is the way that we apply it in different ways. So we use it to explore our feelings, to explore what we're experiencing. How many times have you doodled in the margins, drawing things that may not make sense to other people, but to you, they intuitively make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe in a more modern expression, maybe you're browsing things like Pinterest or things online and you're looking at images. There are an amazing number of places where you can find imagery and you gravitate to certain things for a reason. And maybe those are therapeutic in a way and they allow you to work through some of your concerns or some of what you're feeling. So yes, we do work through it therapeutically, and creativity is the way that we're able to not only de-escalate and decompress from it, but make sense of it at the same time. Even though the art doesn't necessarily, or whatever we're using creativity to apply, doesn't have to be an artistic end product. It could be a fantastic meal you just made for yourself that is something brand new that helped you work through it,
Yeah.
helped you work through something you were thinking about, the process. But there's the sweet spot for highly sensitive people that are high sensation seeking is the flow experience. That's the sweet spot we need to be in most frequently because that's the optimal range where everything is perfectly in balance. There is that optimal range there. We need to be within that as frequently as possible because that provides us that freedom from overthinking. Right? Time gets suspended and we're focused on the brain actually is not as focused on the task we're doing. It actually shuts down some of the processes in order to bring our capacities to bear to what we're doing. So there's a wonderful sort of suspension of time and reality as we're engaging in whatever our creative act is. And we have to move beyond this idea that it means a painter in front of his easel. Because I actually am a painter and done a lot of oil painting, but it's so many other manifestations. Maybe you're a builder and ideas come to you about how to solve a problem.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you're just a home cook and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what do I make for dinner? And then I know I'm going to try this. I'm going to substitute this for this and look in my pantry and I'm going to pull all these things together and make this interesting soup. And maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but you follow your curiosity and your intuition. And these ideas pop up for you. And as I'm going through this flow experience, other things suggest themselves just magically, but they're not magic at all. They're part of the human experience.
And you brought up some, oh, sorry, Bill. Do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
You brought up some very interesting things in what you just said. One, the flow conversation, create a flow, that can be a whole podcast by itself. And I would
Right.
probably love to get you back in here at some future date and have that be our topic primarily. I've been a creativity coach for about 45 years, and I've had clients who have contacted me and said, well, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And it's what you say is that it's how you're identifying creativity. If that person is saying, I'm not a Monet or a Picasso, I can't do anything like that, you can reframe that definition of creativity. If it's a mother who's raising a family of 5, which means that she's running a household, balancing a budget, doing meal planning, doing all of these things that would be considered creative. So I like that you address that because it does widen that definition of creativity. And I'm hoping that more people can find that they are indeed creative through what you've just said. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely welcome. And I'm a passionate advocate for it. And I've seen it in my own life. I'm not just something that I'm discussing in a theoretical approach, but I've always been a creative person myself. And I mean that in the broadest possible sense, as well as a specific sense, because I've known it in different ways. I've been multidimensional about it. In other words, I've been a builder and I've looked for ways to solve problems. Oh my gosh, how do I solve this problem? And then while I'm working on it, an idea pops up. Oh, I could try this.
Mhm.
Sometimes I have to go look at a book or I have to go look online for a video or something. But then sometimes an idea just suggests this is how I finish this part with this material and I use it this way and I try it and see what happens. And maybe I have to experiment a little bit. That's part of the creative problem solving process, which is a known process, right?
Yeah.
It's something that we can apply not only professionally as an innovator, but you can innovate in your own home. You can innovate in your own relationships. You can innovate professionally. You can innovate in any aspect you like. So creativity is inherent in everything that we do as human beings. I mean, just being born itself is a creative act, an amazing creative act.
Mhm.
It's still wintertime actually where I'm at in Missouri, and I'm actually planting seeds inside. So I have things like sweet basil and oregano and tomatoes. Little seedlings pop up that I grew from seed in very small little greenhouses under hydroponic lights. And it's amazing to me, the creative process. I took this little seed and planted it and didn't do anything but give it a little water and some warmth and time. And bang, I got a little plant out of it. That's an amazing thing that creativity in life is inherent in this whole proposition of what we're experiencing.
Do you agree with the definition of creativity that says that creativity is the act of bringing something into the world that wasn't there before? So like you were saying, the tomatoes and the herbs, or a painting that didn't exist before, or a song or something like that. Do you subscribe to that general definition of creativity?
I think it's a good definition in some terms. If you're talking about innovation, I think it especially applies to that. So by me putting a seed in some soil, I don't think that's innovating. That's something that's a known product. But I think there's a beauty in the fact that seed pops open and becomes something beautiful. When it takes so little effort on our part to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Creativity, though, is an fundamental life essence for us. And for us that identify as creative individuals, we know this very well. This is our fundamental core, is this creative essence. This is our life essence itself. This is the energy we feel when we're interacting with the world, and the way that we when we step outside our door, we don't know. We're very open to our environments, and we're absorbing things. And some things we look over, and some things we notice. We notice little details that other people might not notice, like a hayfield that's been freshly cut. We're like, oh my God, look at the color of that stalks of wheat. Now that you can see them, this is a specific color, right? This is a burnt umber color or raw ochre color or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. You get to the point where you can almost think in colors for people that are very associated with painting. But I do that all the time when I'm looking at colors, and the definition of creativity can differ a little bit for each person. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's bringing something into the world that hasn't existed before. And just to couch it in painting terms, people are intimidated too much when they go into an art gallery or museum. But think of it like this. And there's a wonderful painter named Brian Rutenberg in New York City that's been painting since the 1980s, an amazing painter. And I love his work, and he has a wonderful story. But he said that at its core, painting is an invitation. This painter has made something and invited you to take a look at it and see what he's created. So if you come to it with an open mind, if you think of that of going into a gallery or museum and you see a Mark Rothko, for instance, he's just inviting you to look at something that he's made. And I think that's an incredible thing, because it didn't exist before. And it could only exist through his hands and through his mind and going through his unique filter and screens.
That's an interesting point. Is anybody that's been through an art gallery knows is that you can go up to a painting, and what's unique about that experience is that the artist may have had something in mind when they were creating it, but your interpretation of that may be slightly different or maybe drastically different. It changes the way you view it. But it's almost like one of those pictures where you can look at, you can walk around the picture, you can see it in 3D. It takes on different aspects depending on who's viewing it and who's looking at it, which makes art so incredible and so incredibly versatile, and it travels through time really well. I've got a question for you about HSPs now. We talked about high sensation seeking as like the open end of a funnel, which just brings us material and which we can use as building blocks for creativity. But somewhere along the way, the HSP part has to kick in too, which is funneling it through our nervous system and funneling it through how we look at things. I was wondering if you might explain, again, going back to the DOES model, because it's foundational in terms of defining high sensitivity. And we'll just talk about DOES part of it. As it steps through that creative process, what does depth of processing do? Does overstimulation add something to the creative element? How about our emotions and our feelings, and how maybe even our empathy? And then finally, seeing things that other people don't see, sensing that subtle. Is that also like finding where A meets C instead of B, and that's how you look at it in a different way? So the gist of the question is this: funneling it through our nervous system, Tracy, is it like consciousness? By so many neuroscientists say consciousness is an artifact of our brains working, right? It's not something that exists on its own. In your interpretation, once again, going through the HSP nervous system, is it something that's inherently part of us? We're gonna do what we're gonna do. We're gonna create what we're gonna create. Or is it some kind of artifact of our nervous system and how we process things? I know that's kind of a long-winded question, but hopefully you can run with it.
I think of the big picture of humans in general, not just highly sensitive people. We've been around since humans and been that 30% the whole time. But if you look at things like the cave painters, Lascaux, and some of these other locations where they found these paintings that were made tens of thousands of years ago. It was inherent in us, not only in things like cave paintings, but in tool making, for instance. There's some caves where they've explored and found exquisitely shaped tools and instruments for when humans were relegated to moving off of the European continent. And this tool making ability was pivotal to us to be able to access the food sources that were available to us near the ocean. And the thing is, the tools are built or crafted to such an extent that they move well beyond functionality and utility to almost a creative expression of what that tool could be. So something like a tool that can open a clamshell, oh, it's far fancier than it needs to be just to pop something open. It doesn't just look like a knife, but it's actually been exquisitely tooled to become something that has an aesthetic component as well. And it's absolutely amazing that it's inherent to us as not something that's new. When we talk about modern art, kind of getting into something different, but art has been inherent, has been with us from the beginning, and creativity has been with us that's what's enabled us to survive, is the ability to innovate, to think differently. So when you bring it back to the does model and thinking about sensitivity, that deeper processing meant that, you were someone as a sensitive person that probably went off on your own and you thought about it for a while, or you let it sit with you for a while overnight, and you had this brilliant idea in the morning. Hey, I can take this type of stone and I can use this other type of stone to flake off pieces, and I can make a sharp edge with this. It's interesting that we use something called the monoface axe for a very long time. It didn't innovate anything new beyond that. It was only invention of the biface axe with the sharp edges on two sides that really enabled a lot of progress beyond that. So innovation comes from the deeper processing. It's not just noticing things in the environment, but it's allowing those things to sit inside of our brains and to be bounced around between different regions of the brain before we come up with some novel new idea. The high empathy that comes with it is as well bouncing off of other people. How do other people feel about this idea? Maybe they had an idea, maybe we're with them journeying and they're seeing something different that we didn't see, or we notice a small subtle aspect that they missed. If we do, this results in a different outcome. Mm-hmm. It's the same with overstimulation. Can it be overstimulating if you're a creative person? Sure. But I think you seek those environments that are inherent for you. I like certain types of art that make more sense to me, and I tend to overlook other ones that I don't get as much joy from. They don't provide me the novel experience that I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. So I know the areas of, say, an art museum that I really love, and the areas that I tend to bypass a little bit. But I love it all from the very beginning of cave painters. I think it's absolutely amazing the work that they were creating in. Picasso, when he went to Lascaux Cave in France, he came out of there and he said, "We've invented nothing." This is a man that invented Cubism and worked to the age, I believe, 91, and created, I think, over 100,000 pieces of art during his lifetime. But he came out of the caves realizing that, oh no, you haven't invented abstraction. This already existed before with people that we call cavemen. So yeah, the model, I think, of sensitivity, it's always been with us, and it's something that facilitates creativity. I think we haven't had a lot of discussion about that. There's been this discussion about pathology, right? Because so many people that show up in the public spheres that are highly sensitive tend to have troubles. They tend to have issues. And we are more susceptible to mental health concerns, not necessarily mental health disorders, but mental health concerns. And that gets a lot more attention in a way because we want to help those people who are suffering in some way. But there are plenty of people who are highly sensitive that are thriving, right? And it may be they're thriving creatively. And I'm finding some of that in the work that I'm doing for the second edition of Thrill. So there'll be so much more shared on that when this book comes out on creativity. And I love the fact that I'm pivoting this way because we're doing something new. And we need to talk about sensitivity and discussions about sensitivity into new spheres. We need to move beyond this initial phase of describing what it looks like and working through some of the pathologies to some new areas that will advance us forward. And creativity really is the most expansive way we can. And it's always been with us from the beginning. So I think it's tremendously exciting that we're looking at sensitivity in a new way and looking at also high sensation seeking in the way that they're integral with each other. You can't have one without the other if you're high sensation seeking and sensitive. Picking them apart and looking at them individually, oh, that's okay, that's interesting, but you experience them as one.
Exactly. And that comes, Bill and I had a conversation before this podcast ever came into existence about how high sensitivity has been talked about since Elaine Aron wrote her book, but it's kind of stayed pretty narrow. And it's just more recently that people like yourself and like Eric Meisel or Judith Orloff and they're starting to consider these sensitive traits in a broader world, a broader universe that has a lot more impact and feeds so many other traits that we might embody. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Over 90% of highly sensitive people identify as creative individuals. So that's not surprising for me.
Right.
And among high sensation seekers, the number is incredibly high as well. And Dr. Zuckerman said that high sensation seekers are usually highly creative individuals. So you think of people like your performers and people that are out there on stage, they tend to be some version of highly sensitive or high sensation seeking and highly sensitive, depending on exactly. But I notice it a lot. Even a lot of our historical figures probably tend to be one or the other that are very impactful, like Abraham Lincoln, for instance. We know that he was very deep-minded and very focused on his Gettysburg Address, for instance, a very short address, and he was very neurotic about it in the end. And amazingly, it comes up to be one of these things that we look to the most as the most inspirational, the most healing in a way. But at the time, he thought he had completely scuttled it. He thought at the time, this didn't plow. This is what he said, something like that. But this very deep-minded person, this person that was prone to depressions and anxiety, and other figures in life. Look at Martin Luther King, for instance. Highly sensitive, but maybe also high sensation seeking. How many more can you come up with? It's endless. There's so many people. Chris Cornell of Soundgarden. His first wife said that he was so highly sensitive. He was so sensitive. He was so attuned to everything in his environment. But he became this incredible performer. So we're out there manifesting in the world already. It's not that we're new. We're already out there in the world. Many of us don't know about it. And they don't need to necessarily, but they do need to know what's a problem for them when they overindulge in high sensation seeking, or when they're actually allowing sensitivity to become a real problem for them.
Suppressing their natural tendencies toward sensitivity or something like that. Cornell brings to mind Cobain in similar ways. He was very sensitive to his surroundings, and that's what fed his creativity. Do you find that the highly sensitive person are wired to engage with life in creative ways, and that's how we manage our lives? Does that make
That's a real prescient discussion, Marcus, and I was just thinking of another performer from the 90s that we got into this grunge discussion. I was thinking of Star and Hope Sandoval.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware of her work, but just this amazing. They called her Queen of the Shy Girls, and she was so amazing and still is. In fact, she was born in 1966, my birth year. I always feel like that's so cool. But no, she was this introverted girl and probably highly sensitive. Probably got some thrill out of performing on stage, even though I saw a description of their performances of Mazzy Star, particularly early on, as they weren't there for the audience so much. It was like an art piece. The audience was incidental because they didn't pay a lot of attention to the audience. Like, she didn't focus on the audience because she was very shy, right? But she had this incredible voice to sing with, and it was this very kind of girlish voice, right? It wasn't like a belting voice. It wasn't a rock voice in a way.
But it's interesting. It's got so much texture.
So breathy,
Yeah.
right? So wispy and so eerie.
But it's also very refined and very demure. So it's not in your face at all, but you really can sing a note.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Get that message across. And I have Mazzy Star on rotation full time in my house.
So many songs go through my head. I've had a fascination with her for a while. And the song California, for instance, I love that song. There's so many songs I love from her. So I think it's innate in us as highly sensitive people to be creative. How that shows up, or how we tend to express that, I think is very different for each person. And I'm always stunned at people who are musical performers, because I think that goes so far beyond most of the other things that we could do with creativity. The way that you're able to connect with people. There's one performance that Mazzy Star did early on at a place called The Bridge, which had a lot of the school for disabled children.
Mm.
And the way she was connecting with those disabled children, not even really performing for them, but they were reacting in a way, and you could see it. And it's just amazing that the connection they were having. And I think she really played that later on really well.
Mm.
She understood that connection with the audience and how to play that. And she always had a darker stage. She didn't have a well-lit stage.
Right.
She didn't want to be center of attention. So a perfect example of a highly sensitive person that's probably also, I don't know, somewhere high sensation seeking, moderate sensation seeking. Hard to say.
Anytime you get up in front of a group of people, especially if you're a comedian or something, because you get immediate feedback. They either laugh at your jokes or they don't. And there's a lot of risk involved in that. And especially if you're very conscious of what your performance is and how it's being received. But I think one of the things that makes highly sensitive people so compelled to create is this need to be able to express these big, wonderful, rich textural feelings that we have. And I think that's why so many successful artists are highly sensitive people, because we have the ability to capture those feelings that people feel all the time, whether you're sensitive or not, and put it in some creative outlet, whether it's lyrics, music, art, novel, screenplay, whatever, acting, performance, that people can relate to. And, you know, I always think of, we're talking about performers, Robin Williams to me was, Marcus and I have talked about this, I honestly think he's a poster boy for a highly sensitive man, because of the work, particularly that I enjoyed about him, was his serious dramatic work, which I think really touched his soul. In other words, he was expressing internal feelings, and they were so rich and, again, textural and things that you could feel, and they were so relatable, and that's why people liked that part of him too. The comedy to me was antics and almost felt like it was a defensive mechanism to keep people from being too close to him. But aside from that, the man was a genius in being able to express himself that way. So I think for highly sensitive people, Tracy, you're right. It's just something that we do because we're compelled for meaning and purpose and things like that in our lives. And to be able to express that somehow, some way, I think is a driver for us. I know it is for me, and probably for Marcus and yourself as an artist, need to do that. So I want to wrap this up now. We could go on with this forever. We
Great.
will no doubt have you back, Tracy, because we've probably got a million things we still need to cover on this. But this is a great primer for highly sensitive people to get an idea about. As you had mentioned earlier in the discussion, you don't have to be Picasso, you don't have to be Michelangelo to be able to be creative and so to fulfill that need inside of yourself to be a creative. So don't worry about whether or not your stuff is going to rock the art world. If it rocks you, then that's really what it's there for anyway. When is your new book out? I want to plug that for you for a minute, because I've always enjoyed your books, and I think all highly sensitive people should pick up Dr. Cooper's library here. But when is the book coming out?
We're planning for a release by my birthday, September 10th this year.
Okay.
So we're well underway. We're into the editing final stages, and this book will be out.
And I'm looking forward to and I like the thing you were saying earlier too. Let's start spinning some positive stuff about this trait, because I think we get wrapped up in the ball and chain of, yes, we've experienced life in some rough spots, and a lot of people carry those things as though they feel like that's something they have to bear. It's their cross to bear. But the idea is there's so many good things about the trait, the gifts that it has, the facets that high sensitivity brings to people, and certainly creativity is one of those. And I just want to say thank you for being here, Tracy, and I appreciate your input. Always enjoy talking to you, and we will definitely have you back.
Absolutely.
We'll come up with something.
Right. And you can see across my work, interestingly, at all the various manifestations that my books cover, from highly sensitive men to high sensation seeking HSPs, which is how I help fill in the picture for myself, to my first book on highly sensitive people and career. So I've covered quite a gamut in my own work. And now I'm pivoting as I'm getting close to turning 60 to creativity. I want that to be, it's a full circle for me.
Mm-hmm.
I came to midlife realizing that, hey, I'm not where I need to be or where I want to be or where I think I can achieve the most. I'm not blossomed yet, right? I'm somebody that I was a little bit of a late bloomer in some ways. And then I found the right vehicles that would get me somewhere and provide opportunities. And then since that time, I've been able to blossom more fully. And I'm still continuing to do that well into what will be considered my early senior years. And I'm looking forward to it because creativity is that baseline for me. And I know it is for so many other people. And we need to expand how people think about creativity and move beyond this idea of artistic product, but rather that it's something that's everyday. So we're talking about everyday little c creativity that anybody can do. And you do it all the time without understanding that it's creativity, but it's worth talking about because it can bring richness and depth and appreciation to your life and gratitude for the fact that of how we can experience this life and how it can be novel and interesting. And though we're talking about highly sensitive people, my focus is primarily on high sensation seeking, highly sensitive people in a way that we integrate those two traits together and look at those as a creative force, as a life essence.
Mm-hmm.
And then how you tend to express that may be quite different. Maybe you're not an artist. Maybe you're not a performer. Maybe you're a fantastic mechanic. But I tell you what, fixing an engine and changing something on an engine could entail quite some creative to make something happen. And I know that myself because that's something I started working on with my Honda Element was how to fix something. My brother is actually the tool guy, the mechanic guy, but I've learned quite a bit about how to do things and creatively solve problems. So I've employed the creative problem solving process myself in everyday life and in the way that I go about life. So I challenge everyone to enjoy your creativity, enjoy this openness that we have as highly sensitive. But also, if you're high sensation seeking, you also you're that bridge to actually making things happen because we have to move forward. We have to make things happen. So we're the bridge from thinking about it and coming up with cool ideas to actually moving them to application. And people that are highly sensitive that kind of generate a lot of ideas that don't necessarily apply them, maybe you can help them to move across that bridge to application. So we all need to work together in that way, and not only with other people that are highly sensitive, but the whole population.
Yep.
Because we all live together on the planet, and maybe we can help each other.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, thank you very much for being here, Dr. Cooper. Definitely will enjoy bringing you back, talking about a lot of things, it sounds like.
Oh, but I think flow would be a good one.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's a great one. The flow experience is fantastic to talk about.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, everybody. We'll see you next time and for another episode of Still Waters Podcast.